Welcome to In the Light with me, Anna Isabel. I'm an analytical hypnotherapist. And with me today, I have Neeta Naidoo, who is a London-based yoga teacher. Neeta, welcome.
Hello, Anna. How are you?
Very well. And I am delighted because in the process of talking to lots of people about different aspects of spirituality, it struck me that yoga is a deeply spiritual practice. And one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that you call yourself a teacher rather than an instructor, which I think is very telling. So would you like to explain what the difference is in your mind?
So in my mind, I switched from calling myself a yoga instructor, is what I suppose I was when I first started teaching yoga, because I realized very soon that the style of yoga I learned and the way I learned my yoga practice and the path that yoga came into my life came from more spiritual healing practice, as opposed to just what is known today more as hatha yoga, physical yoga, which has led to a huge fad over recent years into yoga is everywhere. Everyone wants to do yoga. It's not an exercise. It's not just doing postures, being able to have the ability to do incredible poses that are not available to so many people. And so for me, I realized soon that I wasn't here to instruct how to do these yoga postures. I was here to teach yoga and what yoga really is and what it's for. And when I can and I'm able to, the origins of it and how it actually came about, because it is a spiritual practice, and it means yoga means different things to people.
That's the reason why I wanted to invite you on, is because I knew that you were looking at it as a spiritual practice, which its origin. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So yoga, it's not as simple or it doesn't have a single answer, but in simple terms, yoga is liberation. Moksha in Sanskrit. Yoga is, in simple terms, freedom. Freedom, a state of eternal bliss. Emptiness. Yoga has been developed over thousands of years. And yoga comes from, in my understanding, how I understand it through my teachers, is it comes from the spirit of the universe. It comes from a divine source. It doesn't come from a person, a human being. Though many masters, gurus, over thousands of years have brought yoga to us, the practice of yoga, but yoga itself is freedom, is liberation. Now, freedom from what? Liberation from what would be the next question. It's about bringing yourself to a state of oneness with yourself and oneness with the universe and oneness with one another.
So in a sense, when I'm listening to you,
yeah,
it's the words that you're using as goals of attainment through yoga are words that I have heard used very frequently in the context of meditation.
Yes.
So what I'm understanding is that this is what makes this a spiritual practice, that quest for connection with the one, is that this is a physical route of meditation towards that oneness.
Okay, so when you say physical route, Anna,
Physical, as in you're not sitting with your eyes closed and meditating to achieve that. You are putting your body into certain positions and you're breathing in certain ways to help you attain that state.
So that is where the misconception, I think, comes into. This is where the misconception of what is yoga, this is where it comes from. And this is what many people understand yoga to be today. Many people, I think, understand that yoga is going into a yoga class, doing a beginner's class or a general class, getting yourself into all these yoga poses so that you can do a whole physical practice, which is, I teach Hatha Yoga. That is what Hatha Yoga is. I teach that. I teach all the physical postures, as many as I am to my students that I have, to their ability, because the practice is available for everyone. So I teach that, but that doesn't mean you have to do a physical yoga pose to experience yoga. Because yoga, at the end of the day, the word yoga comes from a root, Sanskrit root, yuj. And yuj means to unite. It's union. And it's union of, and again, so simple terms, the union of the body and the mind to the self. But I'd like to take it further. It's to the spirit, it's to the divine source. Now, not everyone can do yoga postures. So that's just a very small part of what yoga is, because you have before Hatha Yoga came along. Now, Hatha Yoga is the physical practice. It's the physical practice. And it's a very small practice, but that is a practice that is well known throughout the West, the US, the West, the European areas. But traditionally, yoga was about finding your seat for meditation. That was yoga. Who found yoga? I mean, if you talk about Buddha or you talk about the rishis, they went and sat for days on end, somewhere quiet, in the forest, on the mountains. Jesus Christ, through the Bible as it's known, meditated for 40 days and for 40 nights to find that divine source connection to God or a divine power, a divine source. So yoga is to find that union between the body, the mind, the self, the divine source, the spirit. Hatha Yoga, which is the physical side of yoga, is what has been developed over the years. So Sage Patanjali, who took yoga and basically devised a systematic approach to the practice of yoga. So he systemized this approach through an 8-limbed path. It's called 8 limbs, 8 steps, through an 8-step path. And it starts off with what we call the yamas, niyamas, so your universal disciplines, your moral, personal disciplines. Asana, which is the 3rd part of the 8-step. And then afterwards it comes pranayama and pratyahara, so the breathing, the withdrawal of the senses, concentration of the mind, dhyana, dharana, meditation, and samadhi. Samadhi is the 8th limb. Samadhi is the state of bliss. But before we get there, we have to go through the path of yoga. Asana, which is the 3rd limb, means seat. It means to sit in meditation and become yoga, be yoga. unite this body, the mind, to your spiritual soul, to divine self. What has happened is we've taken asana out of that. And so Patanjali's yoga is Astanga, which means 8 limbs. It's called Astanga yoga. There was a yoga teacher, and you must have heard of Astanga yoga, the school of yoga. There's a yoga teacher, Pattabhi Jois, who then developed a practice called Astanga yoga, which is a very physical yoga practice based on postures, based on breathing, based on making the body strong, in readiness for the breath, in readiness to be able to sit straight spine, sit still, in readiness to concentrate, to meditate, and then come to samadhi. So then that was developed. But there was a confusion because Patanjali's yoga, also known as Astanga yoga, isn't the same as Astanga yoga that was developed by Pattabhi Jois. And then from there, we have so many other yoga teachers that then came about. So that, I think, is the confusion. So I'll give you an example. When I used to teach, and I said, I'm an Iyengar yoga teacher, people used to say to me, what's Iyengar? We don't do Iyengar, don't know, we only do Hatha yoga. But that is Hatha yoga. It's just a different school of yoga. It's still Hatha yoga. Hatha yoga is working through all the postures, learning how to breathe, learning how to then get to a state of that okayness, a little bit of bliss at the end of a yoga practice. You know, when we've all been to a yoga class, when we lie down, this is a feeling of blissfulness, okayness. There is a possibility that, you know, we just have that lovely feeling of, okay, I'm feeling different. I feel there's this energy, the power that I don't normally get if I don't practice. Of course, the body is engulfed by the skin. I mean, we are in a sack of skin, aren't we? Because the skin is the largest organ of the body. So the skin, then the bone, then the muscle, the tissues, the fibers, and everything else that's inside the skin. We have to go through the skin to access the muscle groups. We have to go through the skin to access everything else. So the practice, when we practice the poses, it takes us there. Yes, of course, Hatha yoga makes us strong. It brings us strength. It brings alignment. It creates space in the spine. And I teach it most of the time. That's what I teach, Hatha yoga. I teach Iyengar yoga. I teach Kundalini. I've delved in all the other schools of yoga. I trained in many aspects of all the different styles. But that is not the yoga that we need to just stay with. You need to take it further. Those people who can't practice Anna still do yoga. There's Bhakti yoga. There's Karma yoga. There's Gyan yoga, the yoga of wisdom. You can still read. You can arm yourself with knowledge. You can learn what it means. Eckhart Tolle, we know Eckhart Tolle. How did yoga come to him? Well, maybe he was very blessed because it just came. You know, I read a little something about Eckhart Tolle where he was so depressed. He was so in a state in his life. And he had, I'm not sure how the story goes, but he went into a state of frenzy. He was depressed. His life was just not worth living until he got himself into this meditative state, and he experienced this divine light, this divine source. Now, maybe he was blessed to experience something. He then went on to learn and study what this was that came to him. So maybe he was just blessed from past life.
I think the thing is that there are different routes.
There are different pathways.
Spiritual discovery. But that was why I wanted to have you on in the light, because I know that it's a deeply spiritual practice, and that the physical side is one part of it only. And I wanted to know more about the other part. And so I think that's important. And the wearing my other hat as an astrologer,
Yeah.
I know what it's like, practicing something that's thousands of years old, and which has many different permutations and interpretations that have come down through the centuries. And
Diluted.
it's, well, sometimes it is in astrology's terms. I wouldn't say it's been diluted, but it's certainly got various branches coming from the old trunk, and sometimes people view them in different ways.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. I think what I'm saying is to give one cohesive answer to explain, as sometimes my students ask me, how did this come to be? And I think, well, it's not like somebody sat down and wrote this out. This is an evolution of a system that comes through time and through experience and the input of many gifted and inspired people through the centuries. And so when you're talking about how yoga has evolved, that seemed pretty feasible and familiar to me. The input from people. Yeah. So it's and so here we are, and yes, and it can become diluted because there are people who want to use astrology purely to tell them what's going to happen next week, or and it's to answer a specific question, and that's fine, and it's valid, and it's perfectly acceptable. But there is a much deeper side to astrology, which is about not just, so you can go deeper and you can say, well, it's about psychology. Yes, it certainly is, but you can't get away from the fact that it's a deeply spiritual discipline, because you're the very essence of saying that you're using what's in the heavens as a mirror to what's happening on earth is a very old spiritual concept. And you have to tease out what that means and what's behind it and everything else that comes with it. So, and you may be interested to know that there are connections historically between Western astrology as we practice it and the Hindu tradition as well. And there's, there are still parts of astrology which have things that have been brought in from the side of things. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because I wanted someone to talk about that more spiritual side.
Because the practice, yoga or spirituality, I mean, we say yoga and spirituality, but you can't separate them, because if you're practicing hatha yoga, it might take longer for you to get to spirituality. It may take longer, but whichever path you take, you could be a Zen monk and you could live that monk life, and you could practice mindfulness. And mindfulness is very hard, Anna, to be mindful about simple things like, if you eat, are you able to just eat without the mind having a conversation or wavering? Are you able to chew your food and feel what you're eating? No, we're eating, we're reading, we're talking, we're thinking. So mindfulness is a standalone path. Meditation, sitting in meditation, vipassana, silent meditation. People will just go off for vipassana and just do silent meditation for 3 days, 10 days, 40 days. That it takes you to the path of spirituality. It's to experience really the natural way of just being, and being away from the fluctuations of this mind. And so if I can say, going back to Patanjali, the sage who systemized we have what we call the sutras of Patanjali. If you're a yoga student and you've trained, you've got to read the sutras of Patanjali. Let me tell you, I don't think many students would have read the students of today, the teachers of today, and I'm not criticizing because I was one of them. When I trained, I got my sutras of Patanjali, I got all the books, I did my training, and I went straight into teaching because I was so excited at the time that I could teach when I finally started teaching. And that was a separate path in itself. It's a standalone story, my path to teaching. It's not what I had planned to do, but that's how I came into. There was a reason why it just happened. But I have to say that I've had to keep going back to the sutras of Patanjali over and over and over again to understand them, to read them. The sutras, a sutra it could be 2 words, it could be just a short sentence. But reading a sutra, these 2 words or a sentence, they have to be understood. The Sanskrit words, they're not like English words that one word means exactly what it is. It has so much meaning. So for instance, the second sutra in the sutras of Patanjali, Chitta Ritti Nirodha, Chitta, mind, consciousness. You can talk so much about the mind and the consciousness. Ritti, fluctuations, waves. Nirodha, to stop. So what Patanjali is saying, yoga is to stop the fluctuations of the mind. Now that is Sutra 2 out of 36 or maybe more sutras in chapter 1, and there are 4 chapters. That's a lot to go through to understand the path. Asana, the postures, is just a small part of the journey, the physical practice. So I would say yoga is for everyone, regardless of body type, race, religion, culture, belief system. It's the path to the bliss of God. Now, maybe a lot of people don't want to use the word God, because that itself is another conversation. What is God? For me, it's the divine source within me, but it's the path to your true self. It's the path that we can attain using other paths. So Hatha yoga, the physical practice of yoga, is one path. But there are so many paths to free the fluctuations of the mind, free the fluctuations of the mind from the suffering that we attain through maybe blind faith that we have placed or we've been conditioned to believe in, religious beliefs, our thought patterns, our identity, who we are, because that changes.
And of course, to be able to still the mind means to be able to achieve a calmness,
Yes.
a stillness,
Yes.
still perhaps in the middle of a storm, which is something that is incredibly valuable from a spiritual and mental health point of view. So this is a little taster and of the amazing spiritual teachings that are available at a deeper level once you begin on the path to yoga.
Okay.
And as we've been outlining, there are different routes to that. But I thought it was a beautiful way to introduce the different elements of yoga to our audience. So for that, I want to thank you very much, Neeta.
Thank you, Anna. And I hope there's nothing that I said, it's not a criticism to anyone who practices Hatha yoga and has that physical practice, because as I said, I teach it, I practice it. We can find our path through the Hatha yoga practice, but that is just not what yoga is all about. There is
it's the beginning, and that's this is the thing, is that anytime we can start off on our spiritual quest through any number of doors. And what is worth knowing is that physical practice of yoga is an invitation to go through yet another door, and then another door, should people choose to go and explore further. And
You've explained it exactly. That's so true. Or you could come from another door into the physical door as well.
Exactly.
Because all these doors are going to lead to one door anyway. So, yeah.
So this is wonderful. So, Neeta, thank you so much for taking the time to explain all of this on In the Light today.
Thank you, Anna, for asking me. And it's just a tiny little. It's a very small conversation that's part of
a very subject. Yes.
It's a huge subject.
So if people would like to learn yoga with you, and I know that you have an Instagram account. So how can you go on Instagram?
Just send me a message directly through Instagram, and then I can be in touch with them. Or
how can they find you on Instagram?
So my Instagram is Neeta Naidoo Yoga.
Okay, good. So I'll make sure that there is a link to that as well.
Thank you.
And thank you again.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna, for having the conversation and allowing me to share the knowledge that I've learned, a little bit of what I've learned, yet so much to learn and experience myself still. But thank you, I appreciate it.
You've been watching In the Light with me, Anna Isabel, and I hope that you will join us again. So until next time, goodbye.